Hues connecting booth to booth, talking growth, investments, truth. Landlord.
NPV, net present value. That is a formula that takes into account the time value of money. In retail leasing, the way that is used is really to compare a lease to, let's say another lease. Let's say you have 2 or 3 different leases and you want to figure out which one gives you the highest net present value. Or sometimes you're comparing your potential lease that you're deciding whether or not you want to do with the budget. So you're talking to your asset manager and trying to figure out what the space was budgeted at. And oftentimes to give you a mathematical answer, you're using the net present value. And the concept of the net present value leans heavily on time value of money, meaning that dollars that you get, let's say 5 years from now, are worth less than dollars that you get today. And certainly the dollars that you spend today and that you're investing in on the onset of the deal are worth a lot more than if you were needing to invest money later on in the deal. And I'll give you an example of how it might work. Let's just say that you had a budget of leasing out a vacancy, and you had a $15 a square foot tenant improvement allowance as your budget, 4 months of downtime or a build out time, and a $20 per square foot rent with 3% annual increases. But the deal that you have teed up looks a little bit different. Maybe it's a lot heavier in TI. Perhaps it's $40 a square foot in TI because maybe it's a salon suites or something. And it's maybe 10 months of downtime because there's a lot of construction that needs to be done. But your rental rate might be $30 a square foot, and maybe your annual increases are 15% every 5 years. And let's just say both of these are 10-year deals. Then the question would be, which deal do you go with? So you can take 2 approaches. One is NPV and the other is IRR. Well, let's just go with the NPV approach on this particular case. You would then build out every year what your cash flows are. The first year you're out a lot of money because you're out $40 a square foot when you're and 10 months of downtime when you're only bringing in $30 a square foot. But then you're getting a lot more rent for each of the 10 years along the way. But the money that you laid out in year 1 is worth a lot more than the extra money that you're getting, let's say in year 7 or 8 or 9 or even 10. And so you have to factor in which one's better. And so you build out the cash flows for years 1, 2, 3, all the way to 10, and then you discount it, and that's called the discount rate. What are you, the discount rate they say is your required return, but really the way I use it is I say, what's my cost of capital or my opportunity cost? I have $100,000 I can put into this lease, or I can put it in a bank at 4%, or maybe I can invest it in a pretty safe investment at 8%. So, oftentimes people are using an 8%, somewhere between 6, 7, 8, or 9% as their discount rate. But let's use 8%. A lot of our funds offer 8% preferred return, so I like to think of that as my required rate of return. Excel will help you out a lot here, and I guess maybe in today's world, probably ChatGPT, you can plug in your assumptions and they'll probably help you build it out as well. But you use your NPV formula in Excel, and let's say we use an 8% discount rate. Now you build out your budget, like what's your baseline budget at $20 a foot with the 4 months of downtime and the $15 a foot and tenant improvement allowance. You bring that out 10 years and you do the same with the deal, and then you apply the NPV formula, and it'll give you a whole dollar number of, hey, this is the net present value of the proposed deal, and this is the net present value of the budgeted deal. So then that's going to really help you, your asset manager, and your owner make a decision which one do you really want to go with. And that works with if you're comparing multiple deals side by side as well. Or let's just say, if you had a limited amount of capital and you wanted to know which, deal to go with across 2 vacancies, perhaps, which one's going to give you a higher net present value. So that's a quick lesson in net present value. TIA stands for Tenant Improvement Allowance. What is that? That is the amount of money that landlords provide to new tenants to help with the build out of their space. It's essentially a construction allowance. And that's a negotiated term, and it usually still has to pencil out in between the rent, the term of the lease, how many years of the lease, and how much that they're contributing. So where does this come into play? So for example, if you're taking a space, let's say you're a tenant, a retail tenant, and you're taking a vacancy, but the vacancy is in like a raw condition, meaning that there's no ceiling grid, there's no bathrooms, there's very little, inside. It's been cleared out. Oftentimes in that situation, the landlord could spend the money to fix up the space to better lease it, but they don't know what kind of use is going to take it. So in that case, they probably would earmark like a certain per square foot dollar amount that they would have spent to bring the space at least to a vanilla shell condition. Let's say $15 to $35 a square foot, depending on what you're starting with, and maybe that amount of money, 15 to 35 per square foot, is your tenant improvement allowance, and maybe that fits within the budget. And assuming if the rent is also within budget, you may have a deal. There are some uses that require a lot more tenant improvement allowance. For example, I think like the salon suites is it's very common that they ask for a tremendous amount of tenant improvement allowance, because the cost to build all those salon suites and bring in the plumbing and all of that is quite a bit of money. So for a salon suites deal, it's not uncommon to hear the potential tenant say, hey, I want $80 or maybe $100 a square foot in tenant improvement allowance. Now that might sound a lot, and it is a lot of money, and a lot of landlords would just not provide it. But oftentimes you're also looking to see what is the total amount of money that that tenant is investing in the space. Perhaps they're investing $200 a square foot or $300 a square foot, not including FF&E, which I covered earlier. And in that case, then the landlord's really putting in a third or maybe half of that cost. But from the landlord side, it's an investment in the space and in the tenant, because once the tenant leaves, then they're still left with the improvements. But the landlord has to think, well, number one, do they have the capital or the cash available to even give it? Oftentimes, if they don't, they can, when they sign that new lease, they can approach their lender and maybe have some sort of loan modification that they can draw upon, or increase the proceeds because they increase the value of the property through the new lease. They have to look at what's the likelihood that the tenant's going to be there for those 10 years or 5 years or however many years, and that they're going to be able to make the money back, because the worst case scenario would be you give this big tenant improvement allowance, thinking that you're getting a 10-year deal, but then the financials of the tenant aren't so strong, or maybe they are strong, but they go out of business in 2 years, and now you're really behind the 8 ball, because that construction that tenant put in there is worth a lot to that particular tenant, like a salon suites, but it may not be worth much at all to other tenants. Like I've seen it all the time. Like a restaurant might, spend $1 million in a space, and then when they leave, the next restaurant comes in and rips everything out and puts in their $1 million after that, which is kind of crazy, but it's true. And this tenant improvement allowance certainly gets factored into all of your formulas and calculations to see if you want to do the deal. Like I mentioned earlier, the NPV, that the tenant improvement allowance is an upfront cost, and you have to see if that's something that still pencils out from an NPV or an IRR calculation standpoint. So that's about all I got to say about LOI. So LOI stands for letter of intent, and what that is it is a document that's essentially like a proposal to lease. Either the tenant will send you it on their form, or you're sending it on your form if you're a landlord. And this letter of intent can be anywhere from 2 pages to maybe 10 or 20 pages, but it's supposed to be a little bit of a shorter document, and it's supposed to focus on just the business terms of the lease that you're negotiating up front. Because the thought is, once you negotiate the business terms of the lease, then that part's been ironed out, and you can move to a legal form, the actual lease form, where the attorneys kind of negotiate it out as far as the legalese is concerned. But anything material as far as business terms, such as the length of the lease, the rent, the base rent, the common area maintenance costs, the annual increases, who's the guarantor, what entity signing the lease, what entity is the landlord, the square footage of the space, the bay number, all of that stuff. There's other things like security deposit, prepaid rent, and the use clause, which is very important. You want to make sure you have a very dialed in use clause. But then the letter of intent can also include some of these other items, such as use restrictions, co-tenancy, and all sorts of other stuff that is a little bit maybe non-standard in a boilerplate retail commercial lease. With the letter of intent, I've seen it mostly handled with the landlord's leasing associate and perhaps the tenant's tenant rep broker, but I have also seen it handled with an attorney in some cases. But oftentimes it's supposed to be short enough and simple enough that it's you can negotiate it without an attorney, because it's just business terms. It's also usually non-binding. At the end of it, it says that this is non-binding, and it's just to make sure that everyone acknowledges what we agreed to in one written document. So that's that as well. But that's usually a great first step in the leasing process. And once you get the letter of intent signed, then you move on to the lease. PSF stands for per square foot. That's pretty self-explanatory. It's often used to describe what is the per square foot increment of something. For example, a lot of times the rent in commercial leases are quoted in a per square foot number. So in Miami it could be 50 a square foot, in Tampa it could be 40 a square foot, and so forth. And that's at least in Florida, that per square foot number is annual, but in places like California it could be a per square foot number monthly. And the reason why that's important is because when you're comparing multiple spaces, you in a retailer's looking at somewhere, let's say, between 2,000 square feet and 4,000 square feet. You have a lot of varying sizes of spaces. So the actual monthly rent might be vastly different depending on the amount of space that you're taking. But if you wanted to find out what does it cost per unit, per square foot, that gives you a little bit of an apples to apples comparison as far as what's the cost of that space. Because naturally a bigger space usually costs the same, a little bit more money, assuming that it's the same quality of commercial real estate. Also, your tenant improvement allowance is usually quoted in a per square foot number, and it's just a metric that you see very often, and at least in the United States. I think in Europe and in other countries they might use a per meter type of metric, or maybe even in Canada, I'm not too sure. GLA, that stands for gross leasable area. So where that comes into play, if you're looking at a shopping center to acquire, oftentimes you're looking at the size of a property in a square footage, and what is that gross leasable area. And the retail business, we don't really have a common area factor. So like for example, in office buildings, they have like a 15 or a 20% common area factor. So your rentable area could be a lot different than your usable area, for example. But in the retail business, your gross leasable area is just measured in a standard way, which is it's measured to BOMA standards, which I mentioned before in an earlier video. And it can be applied to be used for the vacant space itself and occupied space. Oftentimes you're asking, hey, what's the gross leasable area of your portfolio size? For example, Saglo has, we own and manage almost 2.5 million square feet of gross leasable area, as opposed to square feet of land or something like that. But it's a pretty straightforward term, and you'll see it very often in our business. In any case, this is all part of my retail leasing proficiency test series, the answer key series. The retail leasing proficiency test is over on my LinkedIn. It's in one of my articles, and so this is the YouTube version of the answer key. I hope you enjoyed. Like and subscribe. My name's Hue Chen. I've been in commercial real estate for 25 years and trying to share some of my experience and knowledge.
Done grows. Bring your cards, take some notes, wear good shoes and plan your quotes. Set your meetings, be prepared. The right follow-up shows you cared. It's not just booth, it's more than